Native American history is rich with stories of courage and resilience, but also marked by loss, broken treaties, and long struggles for justice. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, William Parton, and in this presentation, we'll explore the American Indian movement and the larger Native rights movement of the late 20th century, leading up to key moments like Alcatraz, the Trail of Broken Treaties, and the 1973 occupation of Wounded Knee. Now, sit back and enjoy Voices of Resistance, the American Indian movement in the 20th century. The American Indian movement, or AIM, started in 1968 in Minneapolis. According to sources like History.com and Encyclopedia Britannica, it formed because Native Americans were dealing with things like police brutality, poverty, and discrimination, especially in cities. Early on, AIM focused on protecting Native communities and pushing for better treatment, political representation, and fair enforcement of treaty rights. Leaders like Dennis Banks, Clyde Bellecourt, and Russell Means became some of the most well-known faces of the movement. Long before the American Indian movement, Native peoples had already been resisting injustice for generations. Figures like Sitting Bull and Geronimo are well known for standing up against forced removal, broken treaties, and the laws of their land and way of life. Their resistance wasn't just about one battle or one moment. It was about survival, sovereignty, and dignity. This longer history matters because it shows that AIM didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew out of a much older tradition of Native resistance. By the time we reach the 1960s and 1970s, the form of resistance starts to look different. Instead of mostly armed conflict, Native activism began to use protests, marches, and occupations to reach a national audience. The goals were still similar: protecting land, rights, and sovereignty. But the methods had changed to fit a new political and media environment. In that sense, the American Indian movement was continuing the same struggle, just using the tools of modern activism. The main goals of AIM were pretty straightforward. They wanted the U.S. government to actually honor its treaties with Native nations, to take Native rights seriously. They also pushed for reforms in the Bureau of Indian Affairs and for more control for tribes over their own governments. At Wounded Knee, these goals showed up as demands for investigations into corruption and real discussions about treaty rights, especially the Treaty of 1868, which many Native activists felt was still being ignored. AIM used really visible and sometimes dramatic protest methods to get attention. This included marches and demonstrations, but especially occupations of important places. Some of the best known examples are the occupation of Alcatraz starting in 1969, the takeover of the Bureau of Indian Affairs building during the Trail of Broken Treaties in 1972, and then Wounded Knee in 1973. Later on, AIM also helped organize the Longest Walk in 1978, which was a cross-country march to defend the treaty rights. All this shows that AIM mixed confrontation with large public protest to force people to pay attention. Wounded Knee was chosen because it had a lot of historical meaning. It's on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, and it was the site of the 1890 massacre, where hundreds of Lakota were killed by U.S. troops. Many historians and museum sources, including the Smithsonian, describe Wounded Knee as a symbol of broken treaties and long-term injustice. The occupation started in February 27, 1973, when AIM members and Lakota supporters took over the town to protest corruption in tribal leadership and the way the federal government treated Native people. The occupation lasted for 71 days, and turned into a really tense standoff with federal authorities. The FBI and U.S. Marshals set up roadblocks around the area, and there were several exchanges of gunfire. The protesters built bunkers and trenches and depended on supplies being brought in by supporters. During the occupation, 2 Native activists, Frank Clearwater and Lawrence Lamont, were killed. Eventually, after a lot of back and forth negotiations, the people occupying Wounded Knee agreed to leave and turn in their weapons. Wounded Knee definitely worked in one big way. It got huge national and even international attention. At the same time, it also brought a lot of backlash. The government increased surveillance of AIM, and a lot of media coverage made the group seem dangerous or extreme. Leaders like Russell Means and Dennis Banks were put on trial because of what happened at Wounded Knee, but the charges were later dismissed. That really shows how complicated and political the whole situation was. AIM didn't just vanish after the 1970s. Its influence continued with actions like the Longest Walk in 1978, and much later with protests like Standing Rock against Dakota Access Pipeline in 2016. Historians often point out that actions like Alcatraz, the Trail of Broken Treaties, and Wounded Knee helped create a model for modern Native activism. Even when AIM itself wasn't always in the spotlight, the ideas and methods behind it kept shaping later movements. Wounded Knee and the American Indian movement matter because they marked a turning point in Native American activism. They forced the United States to confront issues like broken treaties and the treatment of Native nations. These events didn't solve everything, but they did change the conversation and made Native rights harder to ignore. You still see the effects of that shift today in protests, politics, and in the way Native voices are more visible in public discussions. Native American history is not just a story of loss and hardship, but also a story of courage, resilience, and voices that refuse to be silenced. From leaders like Sitting Bull and Geronimo, who resisted injustice in their own time, to the activists of the American Indian movement who stood at places like Alcatraz and Wounded Knee, Native resistance has taken many forms across many generations. The American Indian movement showed that these voices of resistance didn't just belong to the past. They continue to shape the fight for justice today. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. As you leave, remember that history isn't only something we study, it's something we're still living, and the voices that shaped it are still speaking.